July 4th, 1187. The Crusader army is gone. Destroyed in a single afternoon on a waterless plateau above the Sea of Galilee called the Horns of Hattin. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, 90 years of Christian rule over the holiest city on earth, will fall within 3 months. History has a one-sentence explanation for all of it. One man, one name: Raynald of Chatillon. The pirate, the brute, the reckless baron whose greed and violence handed the Holy Land to its enemies. That verdict is 800 years old. Almost no one has questioned it. We are going to question it today. Before we do, one thing needs to be said plainly. Almost everything history knows about Raynald of Chatillon was written by one man, William of Tyre, Archbishop, Royal Chancellor, the kingdom's greatest chronicler, and Raynald's political enemy. William belonged to the faction that believed the Crusader states could survive through diplomacy and accommodation. Raynald believed the opposite. They were on opposite sides of every major argument Jerusalem ever had. William of Tyre won the argument in the history books. He had the pen. Raynald won the arguments that mattered. He had the sword. Keep that in mind as we go. Raynald of Chatillon arrived in the Holy Land in 1147 with nothing. Second son of a minor French lord. No inheritance worth mentioning, no title, no bloodline that opened doors. He came as a mercenary, a soldier for hire in a land already full of them. William of Tyre described him as almost a common soldier, said so with contempt. What William did not mention is what Raynald did next. Within 6 years of arriving with nothing, he had married the Princess of Antioch and made himself a prince. Not through inheritance, not through family connections, through sheer force of will and the kind of presence that makes powerful women choose the dangerous man in a room full of safe ones. Princess Constance of Antioch had been presented with every eligible nobleman in the kingdom. Men of stature, men of proven pedigree, men William of Tyre would have approved of. She chose the mercenary. She was not a fool. She was a ruler who had watched respectable, suitable men fail to hold her principality against an enemy closing in from every direction. She chose the one who looked like he might actually fight for it. That instinct was correct. The problem was how he fought. Raynald needed money. Principalities do not run on goodwill, and the Crusader states were perpetually broke, perpetually threatened, perpetually dependent on men willing to do what others would not. When the Latin patriarch of Antioch refused to contribute funds to the defense of the principality he was sworn to serve, Raynald had him arrested, stripped, covered in honey, left on the roof of the citadel in the full heat of the Syrian sun until he changed his mind. He changed his mind. The patriarch had an obligation to fund the defense of his own see, and he refused it. Raynald made the cost of that refusal very clear. He raided Cyprus the following year, a Byzantine island Christian, in retaliation for a broken financial promise from the emperor. His men went too far, they always went too far, and when the Byzantine emperor marched an army to Antioch in response, Raynald was forced to walk barefoot in sackcloth to the emperor's tent and prostrate himself in the dirt in front of the assembled court to beg forgiveness. He did it. He got up, he went home and kept going. That is not the behavior of a man without enormous inner resource. That is the behavior of a man who knows the difference between losing a moment and losing the war. In 1161, he was captured during a raid near the Euphrates and spent 15 years in a prison in Aleppo. 15 years. While his wife died. While his principality passed to others, while the world moved entirely on without him. He came out at 52 years old, landless, penniless, still insisting on being addressed as Prince. Within a year, he had married the wealthiest heiress in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, acquired control of Kerak Castle and the lordship of Transjordan, and positioned himself astride the most strategically vital territory in the entire Crusader state, the land bridge between Egypt and Syria, the route every army and every caravan had to cross. The man William of Tyre, called Reckless, had just executed the most calculated political acquisition in the kingdom in a generation. Kerak was not just a castle, it was a weapon aimed at the throat of Saladin's empire. Raynald understood that immediately. Saladin understood it too. November 25th, 1177. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the most formidable military commander the Muslim world had produced in a century, is marching north through the coastal plain with an army estimated between 20 and 26,000 men. The kingdom of Jerusalem can field fewer than 500 knights. Most of the kingdom's leadership counsels caution, wait, negotiate, survive. Raynald, serving as regent for the leprous King Baldwin IV, does the opposite. He pulls the Templars from their fortress at Gaza. He rides out. He finds Saladin's army strung out on the march near a place called Montgisard, and he attacks. 500 knights against 26,000 soldiers. The assault hits Saladin's force before it can form. The charge breaks through the center. The Muslim army, surprised, exhausted from marching, without room to maneuver, collapses. Saladin escapes on a camel. 1 man in 10 from his elite personal bodyguard survives. The rest of his army is destroyed on the field or in the pursuit. This is one of the most decisive Crusader victories in the entire history of the Crusades. Almost nobody knows it happened. Muslim sources recorded it in detail. Arab chroniclers explicitly named Raynald as supreme commander. William of Tyre attributed the victory to the leprous teenage king who was barely well enough to ride. The man history blamed for destroying the Kingdom of Jerusalem very nearly ended Saladin's career in 1177. He came within a camel's gallop of killing the man who would take Jerusalem. Had he caught Saladin in that rout, and he very nearly did, the entire history of the Crusades runs differently. Saladin spent the next 5 years rebuilding, regrouping, accumulating the force that Montgisard had told him he needed. While he was building it, Raynald was doing something that made every court in the Muslim world stop breathing. He built a fleet, not on the Mediterranean, not on any sea Christians had ever sailed in these wars. He built 5 galleys in the desert at Kerak, spent 2 years on it in secret, had the ships broken into sections, loaded onto camels, carried piece by piece across the Negev desert to the Gulf of Aqaba at the northern tip of the Red Sea, reassembled on the shore, launched the first Christian fleet to sail the Red Sea in the entire history of the Crusades. 300 men, 3 months of operations, they seized the port of Adhab on the Egyptian coast, a major embarkation point for pilgrims from across North Africa. They crossed to Arabia. They landed raiding parties within a day's march of Medina. They captured 20 ships, burned the ones too slow to keep, converted the faster ones into auxiliary raiders. The Islamic world reacted with a shock that had no precedent in living memory. A sea that had been safe for centuries, a spiritual heartland that no Christian army had ever reached, suddenly violated from a direction nobody had thought to defend. Saladin mobilized an emergency response. His brother dragged warships overland from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea to hunt Raynald's men down. They were eventually cornered at a harbor on the Arabian coast, surrounded and captured. What happened next tells you everything about how seriously Saladin took this. He dispersed the prisoners across his entire empire for public execution in as many cities as possible: Egypt, Syria, Arabia. A deliberate, calculated act of political theater designed to demonstrate his reach and satisfy the outrage of a Muslim world that felt its holiest places had been threatened. You do not respond to a petty pirate that way. You respond that way when someone has frightened you badly enough that you need the entire Muslim world to watch him punished. Saladin swore a personal oath that he would kill Raynald with his own hand. That oath is the most revealing thing about who Raynald of Chatillon actually was. 1183. Saladin lays siege to Kerak castle. The timing is extraordinary. Raynald's stepson Humphrey is being married inside the castle. A wedding in the middle of a siege. Only in the Crusader states. Raynald's wife Stephanie sends dishes from the wedding feast out to Saladin through the castle walls. Saladin receives them. He asks which tower the newlyweds are in. He orders his engineers not to bombard that tower. This moment is usually told as evidence of Saladin's chivalry. A noble enemy, a man of honor, but read it differently. Saladin is not being magnanimous. He is being patient. He knows he does not need to destroy the castle today. He knows the kingdom is rotting from within. He knows the only real obstacle between him and Jerusalem is the man whose stepson is getting married inside those walls. He can wait. He has been waiting for years. He will keep waiting until the moment is exactly right. Raynald knew this. He knew exactly what Saladin was doing. And he knew the rest of the kingdom's leadership was letting him do it. He did not have to. The siege ended without him having to fight his way out of it. King Baldwin IV came south from Jerusalem with the army of the kingdom. The leper king, 22 years old, dying by inches, carried in a litter because the disease had taken his hands and his sight. He arrived at Kerak in the first week of December, and Saladin pulled back rather than fight him. That was the man Raynald served. A king with weeks left in him, riding to break a siege at a wedding because nobody else in the kingdom would. Saladin withdrew east across the Jordan. Raynald stayed in Kerak. The wedding feast finished. The bride and groom went to bed. The kingdom called it a victory. Meanwhile, in the rest of the kingdom, the other approach was being tried. Raymond of Tripoli, the great voice of reason, the statesman, the diplomat, the man William of Tyre admired and whose faction William of Tyre faithfully served. Raymond believed the Crusader states could endure through coexistence, through careful treaties, through understanding that the Muslims were neighbors to be managed, not enemies to be broken. He was intelligent, educated, fluent in Arabic. He had spent 8 years as a prisoner of the Muslims himself and emerged with what his admirers called wisdom and his critics called sympathy for the wrong side. In 1186, with the kingdom in crisis after the death of King Baldwin, Raymond made a unilateral truce with Saladin. A private agreement. He allowed Saladin's troops free passage through his own territory of Galilee. Those troops used that passage to ambush a Crusader force at the springs of Cresson. Most of the force destroyed knights and foot soldiers, cut down almost to a man. The statesman's truce, the diplomat's achievement. Raymond eventually rejoined the kingdom's forces. He died within months of Hattin, by every account a broken man. His careful, reasonable, accommodating approach had purchased 3 months of fragile peace and then a massacre. While Raymond was signing agreements with Saladin, Raynald was fighting him. Both men were trying to save the kingdom. History gave one of them a legacy, and the other demonized in history. For 3 years after that, nothing happened. Saladin kept consolidating. The kingdom kept rotting. Baldwin died, his nephew died. Guy of Lusignan was crowned king over the objections of half the court. The truces held. The caravans moved, and Raynald sat in his castle on the road between Damascus and Cairo and watched Saladin's wealth pass under his walls every week. There was a truce in place between Saladin and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a formal agreement. Caravans were supposed to pass unmolested. Raynald attacked it anyway, took everything, imprisoned the merchants and their families, refused to release them. When Saladin sent envoys to King Guy demanding compensation, Guy summoned Raynald and urged him to comply. Raynald looked at his king and said he was lord of his own lands, that he had made no peace with Saladin, that the truce was not his truce. History calls this the act of a reckless man who destroyed everything out of greed and spite. But consider the alternative reading. Saladin had been building toward invasion for a decade. He had encircled the Crusader states methodically, taking Aleppo, unifying Syria and Egypt, installing loyal governors on every border. He had used truces not as peace, but as time. Time to build, time to consolidate, time to wait for the kingdom to weaken further. The truce Raynald broke was a truce Saladin was going to break himself the moment the conditions favored him. Every serious historian acknowledges this. The question was never whether Saladin would invade. The question was when. Raynald decided to force the question on his own terms rather than wait for Saladin to choose the moment. He was outvoted by a king too weak to enforce his own authority and a court too divided to act with a single will. Was he right? The kingdom fell regardless. But it fell while following the cautious approach. It had survived while following his. Hattin, July 4th, 1187, late afternoon. The battle is over. The surviving Crusader lords are brought before Saladin in his tent. King Guy of Jerusalem, Raynald of Chatillon, other barons and commanders. Saladin offers Guy a cup of iced rosewater, a gesture of mercy in the language of his faith. Guy drinks, then passes the cup to Raynald. Saladin stops him, physically. He had not offered the water to Raynald. Under the custom he lived by, offering a prisoner food or drink was a guarantee of life. He had extended that guarantee to Guy deliberately. He had withheld it from Raynald, also deliberately. He then charged Raynald with his crimes. The violated truces, the Red Sea raids, the threats against the holy cities, the caravan. Then he offered him a choice. Convert to Islam, live. Raynald refused. Not under duress, not after torture. Offered his life in exchange for his faith, he said no. Whatever else you believe about this man, the honey-covered bishop, the ravaged island, the broken truces, the plundered caravans, in the moment that actually counted, Raynald of Chatillon chose his God over his survival. Saladin killed him where he stood. King Guy watched it happen and began to tremble. Raynald of Chatillon was the only Christian fighting man Saladin genuinely feared. Montgisard had proved it. The Red Sea fleet had proved it. He had to die, not as punishment, as necessity. He was also the only lord in the Kingdom of Jerusalem who understood that you do not survive a war by negotiating with the people who have already decided to destroy you. History called him a monster. His aggression bought a decade. The kingdom needed both. It buried one of them, and then it fell. Ash and Iron. Every week, the story's history kept to itself. Find us on YouTube and Facebook.